When I found my dead wife's hidden USB drive, what I discovered about my daughter-in-law destroyed my family. You know how they say you never really know someone until they're gone? Well, I thought I knew my wife Beverly pretty well after 38 years of marriage. Turns out I was dead wrong about a lot of things. My name's Harold Peterson, but everyone calls me Hal. I'm 61, been a civil engineer most of my working life, and I've been a widower for 10 months now. What I found in Beverly's secret hiding spot changed everything I thought I understood about the last year of our marriage, and it nearly cost me my relationship with my son. Beverly died of a stroke last February. One minute she was making her famous blueberry pancakes on a Sunday morning in our kitchen, standing at the old gas stove we'd been meaning to replace for 5 years. The next minute she was on the linoleum floor and I was screaming into the phone at 911, watching her face turn gray, while some dispatcher tried to walk me through CPR on a woman who was already gone. The paramedics said it was a massive stroke, probably instantaneous. The doctors at the hospital told me she wouldn't have felt much pain, that her brain just shut down like a switch being flipped. I told myself that was supposed to be some kind of comfort, but honestly, nothing about losing your life partner after nearly 4 decades feels comfortable. Nothing at all. For months after the funeral, I just went through the motions like some kind of robot. You know how it is when someone dies. Everyone brings casseroles for the first few weeks, sends sympathy cards with flowers on them, calls to check on you. Then life moves on for everybody else and you're left alone with a house that's too quiet and a refrigerator full of food you don't have the appetite to eat. My son Victor would call every few days from his place across town, asking how I was holding up. His wife Diane would swing by twice a week with groceries I didn't ask for, usually the expensive organic stuff from that fancy store downtown. She'd organize my medicine cabinet, sort through my mail, help me understand the insurance paperwork that seemed to multiply every time I turned around. Everyone said I was lucky to have such caring family, such a thoughtful daughter-in-law who went out of her way to help her grieving father-in-law. The ladies at church would pat my arm and tell me how blessed I was to have Diane looking after me. Margaret Davis, my neighbor for 20 years, would see Diane's car in my driveway and comment on what a wonderful girl Victor had married. If only any of us had known what kind of caring Diane was really doing. It was last October when I found it, almost exactly 8 months after Beverly died. I was finally getting around to cleaning out her walk-in closet, something I'd been putting off because it felt too final, like I was erasing the last physical traces of our life together. Every time I'd started the job, I'd end up sitting on our bed holding one of her sweaters, smelling her perfume that still clung to the fabric. But the house was starting to feel like a museum, and I knew Beverly would have hated that. She was always about moving forward, dealing with problems head-on instead of letting them pile up in corners. So that Tuesday morning, I made myself a pot of strong coffee, put on some of the old country music Beverly used to complain about, and started going through her things methodically, one section at a time. Behind her jewelry box, taped to the back wall of the closet where you'd never see it unless you were really looking, was a small USB drive wrapped in a piece of paper with my name written on it in Beverly's neat handwriting. The paper just said, "Hal, if something happens to me, you need to see this. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Love, Bev." I sat on our bed holding that drive for probably 20 minutes, just staring at it like it might explode. Beverly had been the most straightforward person I'd ever known in my 61 years on this planet. She didn't do secrets or hidden messages or drama. If she felt something needed saying, she said it straight out, no beating around the bush. The fact that she'd gone to the trouble of hiding this thing and writing me a note meant whatever was on it was serious enough to scare her. I plugged it into my laptop right there in the bedroom, sitting on Beverly's side of the bed where she used to read her mystery novels every night before sleep. What I found on that drive made my blood run cold and my hands start shaking like I was having another heart attack. There were audio files, recordings Beverly had made on her phone during conversations with Diane, screenshots of text messages between them. Bank statements I'd never seen before, showing accounts I didn't even know existed. Email printouts with subject lines about asset management and estate planning. My wife had been conducting her own private investigation for months, and what she'd uncovered was that our daughter-in-law had been systematically stealing from us for over a year. The first audio file was from last January, just 1 month before Beverly died. I could hear Diane's voice clear as day, talking to Beverly in our kitchen, where we'd shared thousands of meals over the decades. The same kitchen where Beverly had collapsed and died just weeks later. "Mom, Beverly," Diane was saying in that sweet voice she always used. That's what she'd called my wife since the day Victor brought her home 5 years ago. "I know you and Hal have been so generous with helping us get the down payment for our house. Victor and I were wondering if there might be a way to access some of the retirement funds early, just as a temporary bridge loan until his promotion comes through at work." I remembered that conversation now. Beverly had mentioned afterward that Diane was asking about money, but she'd made it sound casual, Like maybe they needed a few $100s for car repairs or something. What this recording revealed was that this wasn't casual at all. Diana had come to our house that day prepared with specific account numbers, official-looking paperwork, and a detailed explanation of how they could temporarily restructure some of our investments to help the young couple out. The way Diane talked about it, you'd think she was doing us a favor by taking our money. The next audio file was even worse. It was Beverly talking to our neighbor Margaret Davis about her suspicions. I could hear them sitting in Margaret's living room, probably drinking the weak coffee Margaret always made in that old percolator she'd had since the 1980s. Maggie, Beverly was saying, and her voice sounded tired in a way I hadn't noticed when she was alive. I think Diane's been forging documents. I found copies of account modifications in Victor's name that I never signed. Hal never signed them either, but somehow they went through the bank. I had to pause the recording right there. My hands were actually shaking, and I could feel my heart doing that irregular thing it had done during my heart attack 18 months ago. I'd spent my whole career as an engineer dealing with structural problems, foundation issues, things that could bring down buildings if you didn't catch them in time. This felt exactly the same, except it was my family's foundation that was crumbling and I'd been too blind to see the cracks. There were bank statements on the drive showing that $220,000 had been moved out of our retirement account over a 14-month period. Not all at once, Diane was way too smart for that kind of obvious theft. She'd done it in careful chunks, $8,000 here, $12,000 there, sometimes $15,000, but always staying just under the reporting thresholds that would trigger automatic bank reviews or require additional authorization. The money had gone into something called the Peterson Family Investment Trust, which sounded official and responsible, except for one major problem. I'd never heard of it, and sure as hell hadn't authorized it. According to the paperwork, Beverly had somehow gotten copies of this trust was supposed to be a diversified portfolio designed for optimal estate planning and tax advantages for senior investors. It was complete bullshit. But it was convincing bullshit with official letterhead and everything. The email screenshots were the real smoking gun. Messages between Diane and someone identified only as L. Burke discussing asset relocation and completing transfers before estate complications arise. One email, dated just 2 weeks before Beverly's stroke, talked about how the old man doesn't review statements anymore since his heart episode last year. So we have a clearer window to work. That line hit me like a punch in the gut. I'd had a minor heart attack 18 months ago, nothing too serious, just enough to scare Beverly and make me more dependent on her for handling our day-to-day paperwork and financial management. At the time, it had seemed like a practical division of labor. Beverly was better with details anyway, and I was still dealing with the fatigue and anxiety that came after a cardiac event. Diana had apparently been counting on that vulnerability, using my temporary weakness and Beverly's increased responsibility as an opening to rob us blind. Every time she'd offered to help Beverly with the banking or investment paperwork, she'd actually been setting up another transfer. I spent the rest of that night going through everything on Beverly's drive. My wife had been documenting this fraud for months, and she'd been thorough about it in a way that would have made any engineer proud. Screenshots, recordings, even photos of documents she'd found in Victor's car when she'd borrowed it to go grocery shopping. Beverly had turned herself into a private investigator, and she'd done it without me having the slightest clue what was going on. The last file on the drive was a video message from Beverly, recorded on her phone just 3 days before she died. Seeing her face again, hearing her voice talking directly to me from beyond the grave, that nearly broke me completely. She was sitting in our kitchen at the little table where we'd eaten breakfast together for 15 years, and she looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed when she was alive. "Hal," she said, looking directly into the camera, "if you're watching this, then I'm gone and you found my hiding spot. I should have told you about this while I was still here, but I was scared. Scared of what it would do to Victor, scared of what it would do to you, scared of what it might do to our family." She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue. I kept thinking I could handle it myself. Maybe get Diane to return the money quietly without destroying everything we've built with our children. But it's gotten worse, Hal. She's not just stealing from us anymore. She's got Victor convinced that all of this is legitimate, that we agreed to these transfers because we were getting forgetful about financial stuff. The video went on for another 12 minutes. Beverly had figured out that Diane wasn't working alone. She was funneling our money through fake investment accounts controlled by some business partner of hers. The plan was apparently to wait until both Beverly and I died, then claim the investments had failed during the market downturn and the money was gone. By the time anyone figured out what really happened, the money would be safely hidden away in accounts Diane controlled, and she'd play the grieving daughter-in-law who'd done her best to help with our finances during our declining years. She's been recording our phone conversations, Beverly said in the video, her voice getting stronger as she talked. She's got files on our health problems, our doctor visits, even our arguments about money. She knows exactly when your Social Security payments come in, when the pension checks arrive, how much we spend on groceries each month. She's been studying us like we're some kind of science experiment. Beverly leaned closer to the camera, but here's what she doesn't know, Hal. She doesn't know that I've been studying her right back. Every phone call, every visit, every time she's offered to help us with paperwork, I've been documenting everything, and I've got proof of what she's been doing. After watching that video, I didn't sleep for 2 straight days. I kept thinking about all the times over the past year that Diane had been in our house helping with bills, organizing our paperwork, being the perfect daughter-in-law. Every time she'd offered to help, every concerned question about our financial planning, every suggestion about modernizing our investment strategy, it had all been part of setting us up for the biggest theft of our lives. And the worst part was that she'd gotten our own son to help her do it. I knew I had to do something about what Beverly had discovered, but I also knew I had to be smart about it. This wasn't some construction site problem I could fix with the right tools and some elbow grease. This was legal, financial, and it involved my son. One wrong move and I could lose Victor forever, and Beverly would never forgive me for that. First thing I did was make copies of everything on Beverly's USB drive. Then I called Margaret Davis, the neighbor Beverly had confided in. Margaret's a retired postal worker, sharp as a tack at 68, and she'd been our friend for 20 years. When I told her what I'd found, she wasn't even surprised. "Hal," she said, sitting across from me at her kitchen table with a cup of that terrible coffee. Beverly came to me 3 months before she died. She was beside herself trying to figure out what to do. She loved Victor so much, but she could see what that woman was doing to him, and to both of you. Margaret helped me find a lawyer, Carolyn Martinez, who specialized in financial fraud cases. Carolyn was about 45, had been practicing for 20 years, and when I showed her Beverly's evidence in her downtown office, she just nodded grimly and said, "Your wife did excellent investigative work. This is absolutely prosecutable," but Carolyn also warned me that going after Diane legally would mean going after Victor too, at least in the court's eyes. He was on all the account modifications, had signed documents, had been present for meetings with bank officials. Whether he was a willing accomplice or a manipulated victim, the law wouldn't necessarily distinguish between the two. That's when I made a decision that Beverly probably would have disagreed with. Instead of going straight to the police with what we had, I was going to give Diane enough rope to hang herself with. If she was as greedy and overconfident as she seemed to be, maybe I could get her to incriminate herself further and prove that Victor was just being used. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Leonard Burke, no relation to the L. Burke from Diane's emails, just a coincidence that almost made me laugh if the situation hadn't been so serious. Leonard was an ex-cop in his 50s who specialized in white-collar crime. And when I showed him Beverly's evidence, he whistled low and said this was some of the most thorough documentation he'd ever seen from a civilian. "Your wife missed her calling," he told me. "She would have made a hell of a detective." I asked Leonard to do 2 things. Find out where our money really was and set up some surveillance to catch Diane in the act of whatever she was planning next. What Leonard found over the next month made the $220,000 look like small change compared to the bigger picture. Diane hadn't just been stealing from us. She'd been using our family name and Victor's credentials to run a much larger scam, borrowing money from other elderly couples in our social circle and promising them high-return investments. She'd apparently convinced 3 other families to invest money with her, using our family's good reputation in the community as her calling card. Leonard showed me bank records, indicating that she'd collected nearly $400,000 total from various victims, all of them retirees who trusted the Peterson name because they'd known Beverly and me for decades. Leonard also discovered that Diane had been recording phone conversations with me and Beverly for over a year, keeping detailed files on our health issues, our financial worries, even our plans for estate distribution. She had folders on us like we were marks in some long-term confidence game, complete with notes about our weekly routines, our doctor appointments, and our relationships with our children. The surveillance part was easier than I'd expected. Leonard set up some monitoring software on the computer Victor and Diane shared. Apparently she'd grown so confident in her scheme that she wasn't even bothering to cover her digital tracks anymore. Within 2 weeks, we had recordings of her on phone calls with her business partner, talking about liquidating the Peterson assets before I figured things out and complicated everything. One conversation made my jaw drop and my hands clench into fists. Diane was talking to someone about how my heart attack the previous year had been perfect timing because it made me less sharp about money stuff and more dependent on Beverly. She actually said she hoped I'd have another one soon because it would make the whole thing easier to wrap up before he becomes a problem. That's when I stopped feeling any guilt about what I was planning to do to her. The trap I set was simple, but it required me to act like the confused old man Diane apparently thought I was. Leonard helped me create a fake investment opportunity, something called a secured municipal bond transition that sounded complicated enough to be real, but would require immediate cash investment to take advantage of some imaginary deadline. I called Victor and mentioned casually that I was thinking about putting some of my remaining retirement funds into this new investment, but I wasn't sure about all the paperwork involved. I made myself sound uncertain, maybe a little overwhelmed by the financial complexity. The bait worked perfectly. Within 24 hours, Diane was at my house with papers she'd somehow already prepared for this exact investment. Papers that would transfer another $50,000 out of my accounts and into her control, supposedly for my own financial benefit. Leonard was recording everything from his van parked 2 houses down the street. Diane spent over an hour in my living room that afternoon, sitting on the same couch where Beverly used to read her mystery novels, explaining how this municipal bond investment would be perfect for someone in my situation. She'd already done all the research, she said. She could handle all the paperwork for me, just like she'd helped with those other account modifications over the past year. I played my part perfectly, acting confused about some of the technical details, asking questions that made me sound like I wasn't entirely sure what I was agreeing to. Diane was patient with me, almost condescending in the way she explained things, like I was a child who needed simple concepts broken down into smaller pieces. When I asked her directly about those previous account modifications she'd mentioned, she didn't even blink. "Oh, you and Beverly asked me to help set those up last year," she said smoothly, shuffling through her papers with practiced efficiency. "You were both worried about managing everything after your heart attack, so we restructured things to make it easier for you." The recording captured her forging my signature right there on my coffee table, using the same pen Beverly used to write grocery lists. That was enough for Carolyn Martinez. We had Beverly's original evidence, Leonard's surveillance recordings, audio of Diane admitting to document manipulation, and now video footage of her committing fraud in real time. Carolyn filed criminal charges the following week. The police arrested Diane at her job on a Tuesday morning. She was a bank manager at First National. The irony of that wasn't lost on anyone involved in the case. Her employers put her on immediate suspension pending the investigation. Victor called me that night, and I could hear him crying before he even started talking. "Dad," he said, "they arrested Diane at work, in front of everybody. She's saying you're lying about everything, that you're confused because of your heart problems." What the hell is going on? I told him to come over, we needed to talk, and it couldn't happen over the phone. When Victor showed up at my house an hour later, he was angrier than I'd seen him since he was a teenager getting caught sneaking out. But I was ready for him. I had Beverly's USB drive and everything Leonard had discovered laid out on the dining room table like evidence in a courtroom. "Son," I said, "before you say another word, I want you to listen to something your mother recorded." I played him the audio of Beverly talking to Margaret about her suspicions. Then I played him Diane's voice from Leonard's surveillance talking about liquidating our assets and hoping for my heart attack. Victor's face went white, then red. Then he just sat down hard in Beverly's old reading chair and put his head in his hands. "Dad," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought she told me you and Mom had asked her to help with the finances. She said you were both getting forgetful about money stuff and needed someone younger to organize things properly. It took 3 hours, but I walked Victor through everything Beverly had documented, the bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, the forged signatures on modification forms, the email chains discussing asset relocation, the recordings of Diane planning to drain our accounts completely. By the end of it, my son was crying, really crying for the first time since Beverly's funeral. She played me completely," he said. "Every time I questioned something about the money transfers, she'd make it sound like I was doubting you and Mom. She made me feel guilty for not trusting my own parents." I showed him the files Leonard had found, the detailed records Diane had kept about our family. Our health problems, our routines, our relationships with friends and neighbors. She'd been studying us like laboratory rats, looking for weaknesses she could exploit. "She never loved me," Victor said, staring at copies of emails where Diane referred to him as useful but manageable and emotionally dependent enough to control long term. "I was just another tool she was using to get to your money." The legal process took 8 months from arrest to sentencing. Diane was convicted on multiple counts of financial fraud, document forgery, and elder abuse. She got 18 months probation, had to pay full restitution of $387,000 minus that included the money she'd stolen from the other families Leonard had identified, and her banking license was permanently revoked. Victor divorced her while the trial was going on. Turns out she'd been planning to leave him anyway once she'd gotten everything she could from our family. Leonard's investigation revealed she'd already been having an affair with her business partner, the same guy who'd been helping her hide the stolen money in offshore accounts. We recovered most of our money, though the legal fees ate up about $35,000 of it. Victor moved back to our neighborhood, and got a job with a local construction company. He said he needed to do something honest with his hands for a while, something that felt real after being lied to for so many years. We have dinner together twice a week now, and we talk about Beverly a lot, about how she tried to protect all of us, even when it meant keeping secrets that must have been eating her alive, about how she documented everything with the precision of an engineer because she knew I'd need ironclad proof, not just accusations. My daughter Joyce flew in from Portland for the trial. She'd never trusted Diane from the beginning, said there was something about her that felt calculated. Joyce stayed for 2 weeks after the sentencing, helping us figure out new financial arrangements and making sure Victor was getting the counseling he needed. The hardest part of this whole experience wasn't losing the money or dealing with the legal system. It was realizing how completely I'd been fooled by someone I'd welcomed into my family. I'd spent 35 years as an engineer, trained to spot structural weaknesses and potential failure points. But I'd missed the biggest threat to my family's foundation because it came with a smile and offers to help. Beverly knew, though, even when she was dying, even when keeping that secret was probably adding stress to her final months, she was still protecting us. She gathered evidence with the same methodical care she brought to everything else in her life, documenting each theft and lie, because she understood that I'd need facts, not emotions, to make things right. I kept Beverly's USB drive. It sits in my desk drawer now, next to a photo of the two of us from our 35th wedding anniversary. Some days I take it out and think about how well she knew me, how she prepared everything I'd need to seek justice without destroying our family completely. These days, I handle all my own financial paperwork. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I'm not planning to make that mistake again. But I also haven't let what happened turn me into someone who trusts nobody. Beverly trusted me with her secret investigation, and that trust saved all of us. Victor's doing better now. We're closer than we've been since he was a kid, and sometimes I think Beverly would be proud of how we survived this together. She always said families could get through anything if people were willing to tell each other the truth. She was right about that, just like she was right about everything else. If someone you love leaves you a locked door, go through it, because the people who truly care about you will always leave you the tools to protect yourself, even after they're gone. Trust is something you build over decades and lose in an instant. But the difference between a fool and a survivor is knowing that some betrayals teach you to trust more wisely, not to stop trusting completely.